28-unit market-rate apartment complex that's been completed, and they are leasing up the project now. Mr. Peterson represented the original developers, who's a local firm called Gold Crown. What they're asking to do at this time is they'd like to sell the project and then assign the benefits associated. So primarily the pilot schedule associated with the IRBs that were issued to finance the project. To that end, in the performance agreement that we executed with Gold Crown, the unified government has the right to get the request for the assignment of those benefits in writing, review it, and then make a decision on it prior to that sale and assignment actually occurring. And so that's the document that's before you tonight. We know that the projected sale by Gold Crown is to Sanders Brothers Investments, LLC. We also know, and they're a limited liability company registered in California. They're in good standing. They've got projects all across the nation. They've also partnered up with a local firm called Premier Real Estate. Premier actually has a couple of projects here in Kansas City, Kansas that they were part of, and those projects are in good standing as well. And so from a staff perspective, again, the project got completed. I'm sure a lot of you have been out there. If you didn't go to the ribbon cutting, I suggest you drive by. It looks great. Nice clubhouse, good amenities. From a staff perspective, we don't see a reason to be in opposition of this, but it is an item before you for consideration. If you've got specific questions, I'm sure Mr. Peterson would be able to answer those for you.
Any comments or questions? Mr. Alvey?
I'm going to assume or hope that the fact that this is being pursued by an out-of-state investor is a good sign.
Actually, I won't take up too much time, but if I was going to say one thing, and then I'm going to add one nuance, it was just that I sit here, and as developers council, it's fun to see a project come out of the ground and work so long with Mr. Brakovich and commissioners. You kind of hate to see it go, if you know what I mean, because we don't represent the buyer, but oh my goodness, what a great sign that someone from outside the area looks in, sees that there's a price that works, which means it's somewhat more than the person paid to develop it, wants to acquire it, and wants to be in the county. I mean, I think that is a wonderful, wonderful thing and a sign of more good things to come. And if I can piggyback now on my nuance, very small, but just for the record, in the resolution that's before you, everything is spot on, accurate. The nuance is that, so Speedway Heights is this limited liability company that is formed by the purchaser, and that is who will take the assignment of the leasehold interest because of the IRB structure, and also the performance agreement. Now, the bonds, the IRBs that exist, will either be purchased by that very same entity or it's 100% its parent, which is Sanders Brothers Investments, LLC. I only do that so that it's on the record. Otherwise, this resolution is spot on.
Make a motion for approval. Second.
There is a motion and a second to adopt the resolution allowing the assignment of benefits. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Roll call. Alvey?
Aye.
Walters?
Aye.
Townsend?
Aye.
McKiernan?
Aye. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Mr.
you being here tonight. That brings us over to our blue sheet item, which is item number 6. It's a presentation by the staff and by Sporting Kansas City on the concept, on an amendment to the original development agreement. We'll have Mr. Bach set this one up, and then we'll hear from Mr. Roddy.
And I'll ask the gentleman from Sporting if you want to come up by Mr. Roddy as well. This team has been looking at really breaking this out from the futsal concept and some of the costs associated with it, but probably to start this references back to the original development agreement that we did with Sporting Kansas City and Cerner when they came here. One aspect of that agreement laid out that they would build what was classified as 3 urban fields in our community. The commitment to those fields where they would come in, probably contemplated that they would find a park somewhere or some ground like that where they could come in, put in the grass seed down, and set those out so they would be dedicated for soccer type purpose in the community. Over the years, there's been, well, I will say dating back when it originally came into play, we put out several sites that were contemplated for this. It never really moved forward for a decision as to what locations it would be. About a year and a half ago, Sporting approached us, started talking about the futsal concept, and I'll let them explain what that is, but their motivation that they felt like that was a much better neighborhood type concept, much better field court concept that could be there for kids to use in our community. As we progress this year, and we were also discussing that in lieu of other things in the contract and changes, as we came into this year, I had discussions with Rob Heineman with Sporting, and the discussion about breaking out the 3 urban fields from any other amendment or aspect we'd do with the development agreement so we could move forward with either the urban fields or the futsal concept and get it done. So that's where we engaged our Mr. Roddy Parks team, along with the gentleman here from Sporting, to look at what was available in our community in terms of reuse options, primarily with underutilized tennis courts, where you could come in, put futsal fields down, look at what things were going on around those courts as far as lighting, fences, such like that, put some cost numbers to that, and then compare it. So what the team is coming here today is, and I think the Sporting team will talk a little bit about the comparison between what futsal brings to your community when you go to that concept versus where you are with the larger fields. Really the concept of the number of courts, which is 8 that they're putting down here in addition to the 2 that are at Wynot High School today, in place of the 3 fields. And then, of course, the location is one where we've set out ones that are in really essentially the 8 different districts throughout the community, but that would be other discussion that the commissioners might want to engage on about where they might be. So, Bob, I set that up, probably stole some of the things you were going to get into, but if you want to take it from there.
I think you've said everything I was going to say, only you said it better. With me tonight is Greg Cotton and David Ficklin from Sporting Kansas City. Also, Jack Webb, the interim parks director, is behind me. He's available for questions as well. When Sporting Kansas City came to us from the staff's point of view, we start looking at, the advantages of futsal courts. And obviously, there is some inherent advantages to them, I think. First of all, you end up with a playing surface that's all-weather field. Frequently with the turf fields, we can't play on them, or we overutilize them, turn them into a dust bowl. So it has a problem in that area. The futsal courts, as you've probably seen in the map that's in your agenda packet, they're spread throughout the community, so they're easy access. It reminds me when I was a kid that the neighborhood kids have some facility to go to and they don't have to be driven to it. So it offers that advantages. And I think if you recall in our youth, typically games were 5-on-5, 4-on-4. It was rare that you'd have 20 children, that would assemble for a game unless it was organized. So it offers that kind of advantage. And the last thing I would offer is that by using these underutilized fields, you're basically taking a cost burden from the unified government and transferring it to a useful function for the community. So, for example, if I have these tennis courts and if people are not going to use them, there are going to come a day that I am going to have to demo those courts and spend money just to remove them. So by reinvesting, we take advantage of the asset we already have. With that said, I'll turn it over to Sporting.
Thank you very much. Again, my name is Greg Cotton. I'm the Chief of Staff and General Counsel for Sporting Club, Sporting Kansas City. It's really a pleasure to be in front of you again today. It seems to have been many years since we've had a chance to talk about this. And that's one of the 2 things. I'll turn it over to my colleague David Ficklin to really run through the meat and potatoes of this proposal. But one of the things that I wanted to mention was when we first started this process back in 2009, it was as early as late 2009, early 2010, that we wanted to get our checkbook out and write a check for these 3 grass fields. We wanted that actually to lead the stadium project. We thought that would be a good community foray for Sporting Kansas City into the urban center of our community. But there was no consensus that was reached. We I think along with the mayor, then Mayor Reardon, and the commissioners all became frustrated that we couldn't figure out consensus around where these 3 fields should be built. And so we started looking at other options, and as has been discussed here today, I think what we found was a remarkable option, and one that is, not only does it fit in with the story of our community and healthy children and getting out and playing and learning this game that at least we at Sporting Kansas City and our community is learning to love even more, but it gives us opportunity for Sporting, along with some of its great community partners that are here today to offer testimony, to actually offer programming, which was never before part of the deal that we had with the unified government. Our deal, quite frankly, was we were going to do a couple $100,000 worth of grass fields. And what we are proposing to you today is a significantly higher investment than the couple $100,000 that we had proposed before. And it is Sporting Kansas City, Heartland Soccer, U.S. Youth Futsal, United States Soccer Federation, and El Padrino Premier Soccer League all coming together to do a significant bit of programming in this community. So, so don't vote for this because you want to do us a favor. This is actually more expensive for us. It's actually more work for us. It's the right thing to do for the community, and I think you'll see that as Mr. Ficklin goes through the proposal. So thank you for the opening remarks. I'll pass it to David.
Between the 3 of you, I think you've said everything that this presentation is. Mr. Chairman, Mr. County Administrator, members of the commission. As Greg said, 4 years ago, our plan was quite simple and straightforward, and you and us, and we thought it was a really good idea. But now, 4 years later, we've had a chance to stabilize our core business, the soccer team, and to take a step back and broaden our perspective and say, are we satisfied just with 3 fields, or can we do something really spectacular? And so that is really the genesis of the futsal program that we'd like to outline. And I can get the mouse. Really simply here, as people have already alluded to, Greg and I went through every park in the county and quickly noticed that there was an abundance of abandoned or severely underutilized amenities, right? The tennis courts. There are also a lot of basketball courts that may be underutilized. And so right away there was an opportunity to try and transform some of these amenities or in this infrastructure into an amenity. The program that we're presenting to you today is to take these tennis courts and transform them quite quickly into futsal courts. The goals of this are really twofold. Immediate goal is to really encourage a healthy lifestyle for our youth in safe community parks so that the kids can play after school. They don't need a ride to the Fields complex. Some of these are ideally located on bus lines. Others we've tried to find that are nestled right in the middle of a neighborhood. One of the challenges with a larger field is trying to find 2 acres, to build a larger soccer field, is trying to find 2 vacant acres that's adjacent to a neighborhood. No such problem with tennis courts. Then there's a long-term goal. And you may have noticed in our success with Sporting Kansas City that we have several players, Matt Beasler and Seth Sinovic, for instance, who actually grow up here and realize their childhood dreams and play for their hometown team and won a championship with their hometown team. And I know there's some young boys behind us who would like to realize that same goal. We think that this is a tremendous opportunity with futsal to develop world-class players right here in Kansas City. In fact, the greatest soccer players in the world grew up playing futsal. The countries that continually are the best in the world, such as Spain and Brazil, futsal is the predominant sport that the kids play when they grow up. It might not even be as nice as what we're proposing to do. It may just be a dirt lot, and yet it's the nature of futsal that makes it such a great trainer of kids and a great opportunity for recreation. I don't know if all of you have been to Wyandotte High School, but last July, we hosted the Major League Soccer All-Star Game, and as part of that endeavor, we had a community service project. And we believed in futsal, and it took a while to explain to staff and our partners, first, how to pronounce it, and two, what it was. And we thought, you know what, it's really easy to just build 2 of these courts, and it becomes a proof of concept. And we kind of thought that the neighborhood would like it too. We had no idea that the neighborhood would love it so much that we would paint the surface and go home at night, and the kids would hop over the fence and start playing on it. And we had to do that 2 or 3 times, repainting it just so we could get it ready for the opening day 2 days before the All-Star Game. So it was an amazing thing to see the kids fall in love with it or recognize right away that, hey, this is a great amenity. The other thing is that we found that when you give a gift to a community that's not asked for and not expected, and you invest in that neighborhood, people really take care of it. You see, we have some vinyl banners along all the sides to try and make it look like a Major League Soccer field. A lot of people said, you know what, those banners will probably be there a week if you're lucky. They'll get torn, ripped, stolen. They're still there. This place is treated with such respect. We'll quickly go through the process. Greg and I went through, and we found 17 parks with tennis courts. We talked to people in the neighborhood, and we talked to staff and found out, you know what, there are actually courts that are still utilized. So we don't want to put anyone in the position of substituting one recreational sport for another. Let's just take those courts that aren't used. So we found 12. We also noticed that they were located throughout the commission districts. We're here to propose that we select one court or one park in each of the 8 districts for a total of 10 to go with the 2 that we've already built at Wyandotte High School. Let me say this also, that there are some districts that have multiple courts. We have selected one here, but would be absolutely agreeable to working with the individual commissioner if he or she feels there's a better court or it makes more sense to choose a different location. Just a quick note about timing. As Greg says, we've been waiting 4 years for this. We would like to start immediately. We think that we could actually be in construction mid to late summer and have these ready for the fall if we were to gain your approval. So it's very easy to make this transformation. Repair the fences, repair the court, paint it, stripe it, put in permanent goals. And that's one of the keys, the permanent goals. They're chain link structures. They're always there. They can't be stolen. You can shoot on it without a goalkeeper, and the ball doesn't go miles away. It's really supposed to be something that you can use by yourself should you need to. But what we found is that when there's one, there's many kids out there playing. I did a map. You have a map. Just shows that we were able to locate these across the UG. I'm going to go real quickly here. I think you all know your specific districts, but Bethany Park, Clopper Field, Highland Park, right adjacent to the Midland Trail Elementary School, Clam Park, Stony Point, Wellburn, which actually has 2 different locations, West Height, again, two different locations. And what you're seeing here also is that although we've proposed to renovate one court, there are in all of these locations multiple courts. So should the time come that Mr. Roddy has a mandate to has more money and a mandate to fix these up, there are options for tennis or more futsal or basketball, etc. Then there's one of these that's not really classified as a neighborhood, and yet it's, one, the only tennis court in the 5th District, but two, obviously it's a destination location at Wyandotte County Lake Park. I'd like to turn it back to Greg to talk a little bit about the second half of the feature, or of the program. One is, again, to build it, and two is to program it. So please, Greg.
Absolutely, and I'm sure there are plenty of questions for Mr. Ficklin, but I will run through this again very quickly. When we conceptualized the futsal project, we knew that as Sporting Kansas City, we didn't have the resources to go it alone, and to lend our brand to something like this. We're more than happy to do. We want to be a part of it, but we don't have the coaching staff, the breadth of knowledge, the community depth to pull this off ourselves. And so we shot very, very high for partners that would come in and help us with this project. And you see 4 names here in addition to Sporting Kansas City that we think represent the very highest level of soccer administrators, coaches, and governing bodies in this area. And the really cool thing about it is those top 2, United States Soccer Federation is the top level of soccer in the United States. They are the ones that have the men's and women's national teams. They are the governing body of all of soccer in the United States. They have committed to Wyandotte County and to us that they would lend their resources in a generic way, but they would lend their resources to fulfilling the needs of the Wyandotte County youth population and our futsal program. The details of that are not defined, I will tell you that, but we have their okay and their thumbs up that they're committed to this project. The next one is more concrete. U.S. Youth Futsal is the governing body of futsal in the United States. It is the #1 registrant for all soccer players that play the sport of futsal in the United States. It just so happens to be located right here in Kansas City. There's a gentleman by the name of John Perry, who also happens to be Sporting Kansas City's Academy Director, that is the Executive Director of U.S. Youth Futsal. And I approached John to help us out and to put together the programming, the coaching methodology, the ways to play for some of the programming that you'll see here later on. Heartland Soccer Association is widely regarded as the finest regional soccer tournament and league provider that we have in the Midwest. It has over 35,000 kids that play in it, which is an astronomical number. If you look to the East Coast or the West Coast, you will not see leagues that are that big or tournament providers that are that big or well organized. Shane Hackett, who's actually here today, is the executive director of that organization, and they have committed they have pledged to help us out with scheduling, registration, website, things like that, to get this up and running immediately with none of the lag that we see if we didn't have their expertise. And then Raul Villegas, who you may know as El Padrino here in town, with the Padrino Premier Soccer League, has also stepped up as a true community partner and one that already operates highly successful leagues here in Kansas City, Kansas, Wyandotte County. Along with U.S. Youth Futsal and Heartland Soccer, will be a partner in running those leagues and some of this programming. So there's just a couple slides left. I'll go quickly. U.S. Youth Futsal will operate free Saturday clinics for youth futsal players, U8, U9, U10, U11, and U12s. The goals of these clinics will be to teach the game to boys and girls, inspire youth in the community to play futsal and to play soccer. There's an emphasis on fitness and health, which I know is a big push of Mayor Hollins. Identification of academy attendees, and I'll get to that in a second. These will be conducted in the spring, the summer, and the fall. They will be free for all registered players, and I'll get to registration here in a second. And Sporting Kansas City will have its players appear, sign autographs, talk to the kids, inspire, encourage, and be that aspirational piece of this. In fact, some of these young men that are sitting behind us today did not go to a clinic that Sporting Kansas City just happens to be putting on tonight at Wyandotte High School in futsal. And so I'm sure they like to sit here and talk about, stormwater and things like that, but they're here in support because they care very much for this sport. And so it's something that we're already doing. As David suggested, we have proof concept here already at one location. The academy is something that goes to that second goal that David talked about, which was about developing truly world-class soccer players right here in our community of Kansas City, Kansas. We have the commitment of, there's a gentleman by the name of Keith Tozer that you see up there, who is the executive director, is the technical director of U.S. Youth Futsal. He's also the U.S. men's national team coach for futsal in the United States. He will teach these academy kids, along with John Perry, our academy director. The academy program is for high performers. It's for kids that love this sport, that play it at a high level, and that can take not only the sport of futsal, but its translation to the sport of soccer, regular soccer, to the next level. It will be an invitation-based program for high-performing youth players in the community age U8 to U12. It will feature advanced technical and tactical training, and we'll do that in the spring and the fall as well. And then the next one, while there may be some a discussion that we are certainly willing to have in any direction related to the location of these fields, one of the things that, based on the feedback that we had with these community partners that we were talking about, something that could actually be incredibly unique and just very, very cool, is have a futsal district championship. So the idea here would be we would have community-based teams that would compete in a summer tournament, which summer is not normally a big soccer tournament or soccer season. However, because these courts are all condition, all weather, you can play on them in any minute of any day, we can have tournaments that run throughout the summer. We will play a championship within each of the districts, in each boys and girls, and then we will have those district champions playing a Champions League style tournament in the fall at the Wyandotte High School. So we have a team in each age bracket and both boys and girls competing against each other for a championship in each of the districts, and we'll crown a champion in each of those districts. It will be sponsored not only by all of those excellent community partners I just mentioned, but also Sporting Kansas City, and we'll wrap our brand and our experience design around that and make that a tournament that not only the commissioners but the whole community will be proud of. And then finally, league play. The U13 through U18 league play, and then maybe in advance of that, maybe adult league play. But certainly to kind of round out the youth program. You've heard us talk a lot about U13s and younger. League play will be conducted through the Padrino Premier Soccer League, which is, again, an already established league here in KCK, one that's very well respected. Administrative support for league play will be provided by Heartland Soccer Association, including registration, website support, and then the actual registration when you sign up for your card will be through US Youth Futsal. And the great thing about that is when you register, you are provided, every player is provided secondary medical insurance, which is important in case there's a catastrophic injury, which God forbid doesn't happen, but it's a nice benefit to have through that. And then finally, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about free play, which is one of the reasons why the nations that David spoke about, Brazil, Spain, Argentina, others, have been so successful recently in the World's game. And that is because there's just great places to play. There's infrastructure where kids can go out and kick the ball around with their buddies. And we didn't want to program the heck out of these things so that there wasn't time for kids when they're after school to go kick the ball around, because that's everything. Kids kicking a ball around is what makes them excited about it. Every level can play. You don't have to be a superstar to kick a ball around. And so these all-weather surfaces allow for year-round free play. We saw it actually with the Wyandotte High School fields. They were shoveling them off and the snow off and playing out there. It was great to see. It encourages neighborhood and civic pride in safe, positive places to play and congregate. And then One of the things that I learned in speaking with Alec Lemon, who's back here, who runs a great club here in KCK called Toka FC, as one of the coaches, is the competitive nature of this winner stays. The winner stays, you know, the loser goes off, then they wait their turn, and next team comes on, the winner stays. I think we've all probably played that in basketball, but they play that in futsal too. That emulates the successful winner stay models or the free play models of Brazil, Spain, and some of these other countries. And so, as Alec was telling me, he didn't want 8 courts all together in one place. He wanted 1 court or 2 courts together. So it encourages all these kids to hang out and watch and learn and to get excited about their opportunity to go play next, which I thought was, I mean, it was an extremely valuable piece of kind of community insight that we didn't quite appreciate until we took a deep dive into that. So that is our presentation. I know there are some folks here that wouldn't mind bending your ear a little bit, but we'd be happy to take any questions.
So we're open for questions, for comments, and if there are members of the group who has come here who do want to address the commission, they certainly have that opportunity as part of a regular commission meeting, and we would invite them to just signify that they do want to do that. We'll have them come over to the podium over here. In advance of that, questions from the commission, comments? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Good evening, gentlemen. One of the concerns I have is, and I think Mr. Ficklin addressed this, that this enhancement by the futsal sites and the program that you've outlined not become an either-or for our kids, that we're not substituting potential Chris Everetts and Navratilovas and Venus and Zarinas for Pelés and Beckhams. And shout out to Sporting KC, their names, I'm becoming familiar with them, they just don't roll off the tongue like Pele and Beckham. So don't send me any emails, I'm all for you, okay. And I have particular concern then with Clam Park. I'm not sure how underutilization of the tennis courts for tennis was determined. That's not what I'm hearing from members in the community. So what about an alternative site? For instance, in District 1, this is still in the development stage, Garland Park. Track is there. We're looking to do some other things with that, but you wouldn't have to get into this either-or dilemma. What about looking at a place like that that is yet to be developed for a tennis-size playing surface on that?
Thank you, Commissioner. The issue is purely cost. If we have a hardscape, if we have a tennis surface or a basketball surface that has some level of infrastructure already associated with it, hardscape, fencing, whatever it might be, we can do that for X. If we have to build from a greenfield site, like you're speaking of, it's 4X. That's the consideration. It's if we could find hardscapes with existing infrastructure, we can make this work at this number of courts. If we had to build one, like greenfield as you're suggesting, we could probably build 3. That's the issue. Not to say that we won't work with you, and we'll work with every commissioner to figure out exactly which park makes the most sense for your constituency and for your group. But the greenfield site opportunity is extremely limited, if not impossible, under this plan.
Well, my understanding was from the early presentation that you were going to build from scratch 3 fields anyway, right or wrong?
That's correct.
Okay. So, how is it that maybe building 1 is going to be so prohibitive?
So 1 full-sized soccer field from seed, if we are given the land.
Soccer field?
Soccer field.
Okay. Not the size of the tennis courts that we're talking about?
That's correct. The soccer field is 92,000 square feet.
And that's really what I'm talking about. What about the construction of a football field or surface, say at a Garland Park?
That is probably $100,000 to $120,000 because you have to grade the field, you have to pour the site, You have to put the fence around it, and David can speak to it better than I can, but he's the construction guy. I've just seen the numbers, and it's a very expensive piece of infrastructure to build. Now, we can go in, if it's, like I was saying, existing infrastructure, like existing tennis court, and do it for much less money.
Commissioner, I could add to answer some of your questions. When staff looked at the list, we purposely tried to avoid places where we'd be interfering with tennis players or basketball players. We didn't want to create a fight, in the community. And so at Clam Park, there's 6 tennis courts there. So what this proposal has is converting one to a futsal court. So there'll still be 5 more courts available for tennis.
Okay. So you're not boxed into this
No.
Venus Arena versus Paley and
No, we purposely, if you go back to our list, there's some places we said that's not, you can't do that. You'll be pushing people off the court. We purposely tried to find courts that were totally underutilized, and we'd pick sites where there was multiple courts still available for tennis.
Okay. Thank you.
You know,
I
I
still
live-
invite you to look at Garland Park, nevertheless. Thank you.
And we will.
I live quite close to Wyandotte. I learned to play tennis at Wyandotte High School. There's not been a lot of tennis playing on that surface in a long time, and it's been very depressing to see the condition of those courts over the last few years because they're really underutilized and the equipment has been in poor shape. Was very pleased to see those courts go in over there. And the comment that I get from the people in the neighborhood there is, those kids are on that field all the time. And it's not a case of those darn kids. It's those kids are on that field all the time. And my last walk through that field, the scars on the canvas banners told me that they had seen a lot of balls come across them. And the bow of the chain link fence at the back of the goal told me that it had absorbed a lot of shots. So I think that speaks to the use that it is getting at this point in time. I'm hearing it from the neighbors, and I see the physical evidence of it when I visit the field. So at least for that one location, it certainly appears to be a very positive thing for the kids in the neighborhood. And did I see, there's someone got up a moment ago, yes, right there. If you could, just for the sake of our record, just give us your name and your address, and then you have an opportunity to speak.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner, thank you. My name is Kelly Mather with Kansas City, Kansas Public Schools. My address is 1730 North 92nd Terrace, Kansas City, Kansas. Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee and the commissioners in regards to this event. I just want to say a couple things. I don't want to continue to be redundant and repetitive with all of the wonderful things that have been said about the futsal court at Wyandotte High School and the potential of the proposal before you for additional futsal courts. However, I would like to say a couple things that I think are important. When Sporting KC approached the school district about this project, I have to say that we too were a little bit reticent. Frankly, I didn't even know what futsal was. I had to Google it myself, not speaking for other folks, maybe they knew. But I learned very quickly what it was and the importance that it carried, frankly, with soccer and with young people and adults alike in regards to their skill level and their foot skills that they do on the court and how fast the game is on the futsal court. So in multiple conversations with Sporting KC, we talked about Wyandotte High School. And as you just mentioned, Commissioner, the field tennis court was not in good condition. Frankly, it was quite deplorable. And we had not done anything. We weren't fielding, if you will, or courting a tennis team at Wyandotte High School for many years. So we thought, why not? Let's put a futsal court in there. We had the same comments from folks. Oh, it won't be taken care of, and the banners will be ripped down in a week or two, and frankly, they haven't been. We've talked about putting plexiglass up around the banners that are there just simply to protect them from weather only, but not because the community's not taking care of it. The principal further tells me that the PE teacher uses it on a regular basis. The soccer coaches, of course, are utilizing it, but more importantly, the community is using it nonstop. The kids are out there all the time. And I'm also, one responsibility of my job, of many, is that I get all of the incident reports that occur in our school district. because I was concerned about liability issues too. What happens if somebody gets hurt? I have not received one incident report in regards to the utilization of the futsal court. I think that says a lot about the futsal court and the implementation of it, the use of it, the safety behind it. So we're pleased to have it. We've looked at other options in the school district for additional futsal courts. We do field a tennis team at Washington High School, so I've asked them not to do that at this point, but we're open for further conversation in the future. We've been very pleased as a school district with the collaboration with Sporting KC. I really do believe in the concept, if you build it, they will come. I've watched it now on multiple occasions, not just the futsal court, but in other venues as well. But this has been a really positive venue for our kids. Our kids in Wyandotte County and our community deserve this kind of opportunity and this kind of venue. So I thank Sporting KC and the opportunity to speak before the commission this evening.
Thank you.
But we have young people, maybe they would like to speak. I don't know. I don't want to put them on the spot.
We won't put them on the spot. However, if they would like to, they certainly have that opportunity. I will say one other thing. 8th Street Park, we recently put up some soccer goals down in 8th Street Park at 8th and Barnett, and that also gets utilized heavily to the point where the grass is gone, and I don't think there's a chance we're going to get that grass back. So one of the other attractions of the futsal courts are the surface. And the relative lack of maintenance required to keep that surface in good shape, because when it rains at 8th Street Park, that field is unplayable for probably a week after a good rain. Not that they don't try, but it's really not conducive to a good game down there. Great.
That's been an important part for us, as well as the maintenance and the surface itself. I might just add one final thing. We've had one complaint about the Wyandotte High School futsal court, and you probably can imagine it. Once a bulldog, always a bulldog, right? And the colors of that school are what?
Red and white.
And the court is not red, so they welcome it with open arms, I will say. So the students are here before you.
My name is Alec Lemon. Did you need my?
Yeah, go ahead and give us your name and your address.
My name is Alec Lemon, and I coach these boys on a team called Toka, based out of here. I live at 510 Ohio Avenue, Kansas City campus. So, well, we obviously love the court. We've trained there every Wednesday all through the winter, unless there was snow. We basically played, and that kind of depended on how much snow there was. If there's just a little bit, we'd still play. It's pretty much busy every night of the week, and I know for these boys, it's specifically Don, because he lives close enough that he can walk there. He walks about 20 minutes to get there and plays as much as he can, and if he can bum a ride off me, he'll get over there and go play as well. The biggest benefit I see it having in the community, other than the development soccer-wise and things like that, is how it brings the kids together. Because soccer is the one thing in this community that's the common activity. It's a shared thing across kind of the diversity of the community. And if you look at kind of what, there was actually a study that University of Utah did on basically why people are friends, and what they found is that they'll tell you it's because they have common beliefs and attitudes, but it's actually shared activities that they develop friends through. And Don, for example, when we first made the team, he didn't want, he's from Nepal and didn't want any kids from Mexico on the team. He kind of felt like, well, we just want a Nepali team, you know. But then we had a kid that was from Mexico that was very good, and he was like, I don't know if I want him. And then he came out and played, and he was really good, and we had a lot of fun, and they got to know each other, and now, you know, he's pretty good friends with James and Jorge and loves those guys. So what you see is they're very different families, beliefs, everything, but the shared activities brings them together, allows them to make friends. So really the fabric of a community is the relationships, and soccer is huge. So I have a very specific perspective on it, and I'm very strongly passionate that it will change the community. Like, you have no idea how much it'll change your community if you build these fields. You can't really calculate the value. So,
Thank you.
got anything?
Hi, I'm Shane Hackett. I'm with Heartland Soccer. I'm the executive director, and our address is 9161 West 133rd Street. I just wanted to kind of reiterate our commitment. I know that Greg talked about it, but Heartland Soccer, it's amazing that in Kansas City we have the largest soccer league in the United States and host some of the largest tournaments in the United States, and kind of our little Midwestern town. And we're very excited through our nonprofit to be able to support the futsal concept. I grew up playing here. I was lucky enough to grow up with a German soccer coach and went to college at William Jewell, went and played in Europe. I had never heard of futsal until my oldest of 5 got recruited to play futsal here in Kansas City, and I had no idea what it was. And it was one of, and of my 5 kids, all of them have played. And what you find out is how much it helps with their foot skills in terms of development. The balls roll on a flat surface. You have weighted balls, and it is some of the best skill development. And incredible times with me coaching my kids and my kids playing. But really the purpose is to let you know our commitment in terms of helping out for if there's leagues run, if there's academies run, we're willing to volunteer our services, and we have a very large staff. We now have over 1,000 referees, and as Greg mentioned, 35,000 kids play through Heartland Soccer now. So thank you all.
Thank you. Any other questions, any other comments from the committee? So at this point, the idea behind, excuse me, the idea behind bringing this here tonight was to have this discussion, to have this presentation. And now, basically, if this committee so chooses, we can ask our staff and the sporting staff to basically move forward with an amendment to the original development agreement, which then all of these specifics that we've talked about could be discussed as part of that arrangement to amend the original development agreement. That could then come back to this committee for final approval before it would go forward to the full commission. So we would have plenty of opportunity to get into some of the details that we've talked about here tonight, and to make sure that the other commissioners also have an opportunity to get in on those details and have input into the final development, or amendment rather, to the development agreement. Or, if we don't think that this concept is worth pursuing sporting's time and our staff time, then we could simply let it drop here tonight, and we could look for another alternative to move forward.
So do you need a motion to move this forward?
If we would need a motion to direct our staff to work with sporting to develop an amendment to the original development agreement that would outline all of the things that we've talked about here in such a way that we could then vote on it.
So moved.
Yes, ma'am.
Question what I was going to ask is, so the amendment would be that there would not be the 3 urban fields anymore.
That is correct.
As part of the development agreement.
That is correct.
And this presentation, as discussed, would be the one that would be substituted to move forward.
That is correct.
Second.
There is a motion and there is a second to direct our staff and sporting staff to work together on an amendment to the original development agreement to move forward with the concept of the futsal fields and the futsal programming. Roll call, please.
Roll call. Alvey.
Oh,
Aye.
I'm sorry. Well, I'm sorry, I called that a little bit early. I did not ask for further discussion. I apologize. We'll rewind that and pretend that I didn't call for the roll call. Further discussion.
The only thing that I would like to see would be for the community at large to have an opportunity to hear this presentation at this planning stage, so that they have the ability to really understand that in a lot of cases there will not be this either or, this giving up of tennis versus football,
You're close.
will be made. That's good enough for a start. Futsal. Because that is a prevailing conversation that I hear in the community. And I want the facts of it to be brought out so that it is clear. It would be great that Kansas City is internationally known. And I think this is a sport that is only going to continue to grow in its importance and all of that. But I think it's important that the community know how that's going to affect these particular areas.
So then we would ask our staff and sporting staff, as they go through the development of the amendment, to work with each commissioner to reach out to neighborhoods and neighborhood groups as necessary to make sure that they are aware, informed, and in agreement with whatever the final plan is for that district.
Right. For instance, I could foresee having a meeting in District 1 for, to let people know, this is the plan, and to answer and or dispel any misconceptions. Hear any further comment?
So our staff and sporting staff would engage with the commissioners and would reach out to neighborhoods and neighborhood groups as a function of developing the amendment.
Yeah, I think we could schedule that. So with commissioners and maybe working with livable neighborhoods, we could come up with hopefully a few joint area meetings, and we wouldn't have to do 8 across the community. That would be quite a bit, but if we could get a few where interested parties, and if we get them advertised out there through livable neighborhoods, we could get those that would be, I think, actively interested in to comment on it.
Yes, thank you.
Question.
Yes, sir.
So I really support this program, and what I'm hearing them say is that they would like to exchange 8 futsal courts for 3 urban soccer fields, generally, right?
Correct, as I
And,
understand.
Which I think is great and makes a lot of sense at several levels. But are we also agreeing right now that they're going to be distributed 1 per district? Because, and the only reason I ask is that I think there are some other commissioners who thought that most of the investment on this part of the development agreement was going to be in the urban portion of the county. And it would be good to hear the explanation from Sporting as to why it makes sense to spread them out into the county, and that all makes sense. And the fact that, this blue sheet thing only came out at 5 o'clock Friday night, I think it didn't give a lot of commissioners much notice to really chime in on it. So I would like to just say that the locations are to be discussed, and I'm not sure, though I would probably agree with it, I'm not sure that us deciding 1 futsal court per district is the thing to do at this particular point in time.
So, go ahead.
I guess my comment to that is I understood that when the 3 fields were proposed, there was a kind of a movement to place them all within 1 particular district. And so if I am correct in that, there was difficulty in moving forward. It would seem to me that it's really not Sporting KC's responsibility to work through the political issues that the commission needs to work through. So I would agree with you.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and I would probably say, in working with Sporting, we kind of just started breaking down the numbers, kind of worked out to get into this 8 range, and that just seemed like a logical solution to come forth. I would say if you go back to the intent of our original development agreement, we talked about the urban fields. Yeah, you'd probably say 6 of the 8 here meet that. We use 635 as kind of that dividing line to say east up. 2 of them are very close to that in nature. So I'd say based on the concept and all the discussion that was had back at the time, 6 of them probably fall within the geographic boundary of what we were discussing for the 3 urban fields. But that decision, and probably what we could develop in terms of a contract, would be one that there's 8 fields, and it's a tennis court concept that we're replacing that has the fencing and stuff like that around there. Providing that we meet that, I would venture to say you gentlemen don't care. Well, I shouldn't say that. You do care because you've expressed, it's nice to get them spread out into various neighborhoods throughout the city. And that would be a good one for you to get into, because I know you did offer those comments when we started talking about placements.
And I would say to that, that if you, so for instance, if we use 635 as a hard and fast dividing line between disadvantage versus advantage, that's a false statement. If, you know, the one that you plan to build or propose to build at Highland Park next to Midland Trails, that is right at the edge of Highland Crest, which was built right after the flood of '51. Those homes range from 600 square feet to maybe 1,100 square feet. I think 2/3 of those properties are rental properties. It's a perfect place for that field, and I know that tennis court is not used probably since I lost there. So I think we have to be careful to say that, well, if it's not east of 635, we're really not talking about serving the right kinds of kids. In fact, it does, so.
Yeah. Well, there should be one in Edwardsville, the hotbed of soccer. They've had a youth soccer league there for over 30 years that I know of. So.
Maybe, do you want to let them answer the location question a little bit? I think.
Well, what I was going to just suggest was that as a function of developing the amendment, that sporting staff and our staff engage with commissioners and engage with community, so that by the time that amendment is crafted, that we're all pretty much okay with the locations of all the courts. And I think the fact that we're not going to actually take action on that amendment tonight gives us some time, although I know you would love to get started, what, tonight at 9?
Absolutely.
Okay. But it does give us a little bit of time to engage everyone who's not at this table tonight to make sure they have a voice in this. Any other discussion, questions? So there is a motion and a second to direct our staff and sporting staff to work together on an amendment to the original development agreement for Futsal Courts, which they would then bring back to this committee. Roll call, please.
Roll call. Alby?
Aye.
Walters?
Aye.
Townsend?
I with the provisos.
Correct.
Kieran?
Aye.
I would just add that we probably won't have the development agreement done in 2 weeks, which is when this agenda is due back out. But we'll tee it back up, have the key points on there and where we're at in developing it. But I just don't think I'll have a polished document done in 2 weeks' time.
That's right, because somebody, we don't need to name names or point fingers, but it was me, asked for us to accelerate the deadline for items to be on this agenda. It really shortens the time after we make a decision before the next deadline comes up. So as long as we all know that there's going to be some timing issues potentially with this. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Appreciate having you here tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
That is the last item on our agenda. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Sure you did.
There was, yes, that's right, I already said it. We did have the main, that was item number 6 on our main commission agenda, but we also had our outcomes agenda. Item number 1 on that was the revisions to the economic development policies, the TIF policies.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yep.
I think you would need to reconvene.
Yes, we're gonna need to recall the meeting now, aren't we? Since the chair adjourned it without reading all the way to the end of it, and I even highlighted that item on my agenda. So I'd like to welcome everyone to this meeting of the Economic Development and Finance Standing Committee. Public comment is welcome on any item. You will have an opportunity to make that comment when that item is up for discussion. If you wish to make that comment, please be recognized by myself. Go to the podium at that time. You'll be given up to 5 minutes to make your comments. We ask that everyone please speak directly into a microphone for accurate recording and broadcasting purposes. Roll call, please.
Roll call. Alby,
Still here.
Walter,
Here.
Virgia, Townsend,
Here.
and Kieran.
Still here as well. So now I'll flip back to the other agenda, and that would be, we're now on our outcomes agenda. Item number 1 on our outcomes agenda is our discussion and potential adoption of revisions to our economic development policy as we discussed last month. We have Mr. Levin, Mr. Moore, and Mr. Brakovich with us tonight.
I offered Mr. Levin to take the lead on this since today is a vacation day for him. But he's asking me to start. So this is a follow-up. We've been back before this committee on a couple of occasions now. We had a discussion about TIF as part of the package with the local economic development incentives, all the policies that were listed out. Did a follow-up to that with the TIF financial status report. And then the request from the committee was some of the lessons learned that we discussed, incorporating that language back into that original local economic development incentives policy structure. And so that's what we've done. We've amended what ended up being the third page of that policy with the TIF discussion. We outlined the lessons learned into two different categories. One is policy directives, and then the second being recourse options, with the intent being, as these are now formally listed as part of the policy, that every development deal that we're structuring from this point forward with regards to TIF projects have these provisions either addressed, each provision, or the ones that actually apply to the project we're working on. The other portion was to maybe take a look at the existing underperforming TIFs to see if those development agreements had some semblance of these recourse options or policy directives, and if they didn't, what default type options did they have within those existing agreements? And so to that end, I know that legal's done a little bit more work, in-depth work, researching that, and I'm sure Mr. Levin does have other comments.
Yeah, I think what I might like to speak to is the actual suggested policy additions, if you have those in front of you. And as George mentioned on the third page, we've summarized policy directives and recourse options. And if I may go through the policy directives, I think these are elements that we would, as we move forward with future TIFs, and we've implemented these to a degree, but we would, I'll say, we would look to these directives and make certain that we're adhering to those directives. Feasibility studies, we would require the developer to not just present a best case situation, but give us at least analyze if certain projections are not meant, how that project would perform. We have certainly pushed developers on bonding options to structure any development deal as a pay-as-you-go, meaning the developer reimbursement is dependent upon the revenues generated from the project. Where we've provide reimbursement in advance, it will be clearly presented to the commission that it's a policy action on the commission's behalf before we move in that direction. The one item that I think is very important is performance measures. And essentially they require certain conditions to be met by the developer before we would proceed with the approval of the project plan. What's key about the project plan, that really defines the time frame for the project or our ability to capture TIF revenues, which is a 20-year clock. So we would not start that clock or actually incur those expenses until the developer met those conditions. And it might relate to having financing in place, an agreement for acquisition of the site. So whatever those conditions we would define, and so we can move forward with the development agreement, but really not begin the, ask for commission's approval of the project plan. And the same then would also adhere towards the issuance of debt. From my part, I think on any TIF project, we want to capture some revenues ourselves, because that's our ability to grow the community, and they certainly come from property and sales tax. I think historically, and what makes more sense from a policy standpoint is to allow the developer to capture the property tax TIF. So, or the property tax increment. Sales tax increment, I would view that as a secondary benefit to the developer, but if we had our own, goals and objectives, we would want to capture that sales tax increment, but in certain instances, to make that project move forward, and if it's the policy of the commission, then there might be a sharing or a pledge of sales tax revenues, and we've had success with doing that. I can cite several examples: Plaza at the Speedway, 39th and Rainbow, where there's been a mix in the capture of those sales tax increments, both a sharing by both the government and the developer. The sunset provision gives us, it really puts the burden on the developer to make certain he's met those conditions before the project plan is approved. And if those conditions are not met, then the sunset occurs, and then we've not committed any financial resources, and if the developer's not able to do what he had at least agreed to in the agreement, then his ability to move forward with the project is limited, or at least goes back before the commission if there might be a rational reason for that inability to perform. The next item refers to clearly stating what is being provided in terms of public infrastructure improvements, and specifically quantify the specific dollar amounts. And then the last item is really, it's if a developer has failed to perform in the past, when we present any proposal in the future, we'll clearly present that information to this governing body and say this is a developer who may or may not have performed well previously.
Lou, could I ask a question?
Sure.
The directive, as part of development, segregate and quantify dollar amount used for public infrastructure. And what issue or problem does that resolve?
What is that? I think it's just there's a clear understanding of the expectations on the public infrastructures that's to be provided. I don't know if George or Doug wants to add anything.
So does that, in other words, give us a better idea about what the advantages are to the community?
Yeah, I think it's so that when full commission is presented with this analysis and request for approval of the plan, you can say, well, we know we're giving up X percent of our increment for so many years, but part of doing this TIF project, we're getting X dollars in public infrastructure improvements.
Great, thank you.
Okay. If there are any more questions on the policy directives, and then maybe I'll continue with the final section. The recourse options, One is to restart the TIF, and we've had discussions with, specifically as it relates to the Midtown TIF and looking at what options are available. That's a TIF we understand, we know that hasn't performed to the level that we want. We had conversations about that TIF earlier this morning, or this evening, and there are options for terminating a TIF and then restarting it. And what the ability to do is, if we restart it, is that allows us to use that 20-year clock that's established or associated with the TIF. We've had some residential TIFs that I'll say in the older urban areas that haven't performed as well, and they've had the ability to, or our abilities to capture property tax increment. However, as we've, I'll say, fine-tuned our NRA policy, I think it's clearer to us that the NRA might develop better options for us. And so I think if we move forward in the future with residential TIFs, we'll certainly give strong considerations if there's benefits with utilizing that TIF in conjunction with our NRA policy. Refinance bond debt simply, and that's something we do on an ongoing basis. We look at our ability to, can we create any savings by refinancing our debt? And if so, if we have previously made a pledge, a general obligation bond pledge to a TIF project, if it's financially reasonable or feasible, if we refinance it, it will reduce our TIF obligations. I see termination recommendations, and I might have to look towards George or Ken to specifically. I'll ask them to come back on that specific item. The development agreement shall contain non-compliance actions. Again, I want to let Ken address that specific one. And modify the project plan. That's something we always have the ability to do, and if we believe it will help improve the performance of the project as in the future, we'll certainly look at the option of modifying the project plan. I think the last item is to take property, or it's, I think the idea is that at some point in the future, it might be advantageous to remove property from a TIF area and use it for a different development option. So, and maybe in a more productive way. George or Ken, do you want to further discuss any of those?
One of the things we looked at was kind of in the realm, I guess, of lessons learned. And so I looked and evaluated the four residential TIFs that really, the non-performing TIFs, and all four of them really are the residential ones except for kind of the Midtown. And, you know, the first one was in 1998. And in looking at those development agreements, first is that they did not take into consideration any economic downturn or anything of that nature. They, that's why we're addressing that, is to have a more realistic feasibility study. You know, we looked at the statute, the TIF statute, to see what protections may be contained in a statute, and it just requires the feasibility study. But then again, it doesn't really set any parameters, and that's a kind of a discretionary act for the developer to propose and the commission to accept. And again, we found out that those projections were overly optimistic. The TIF statutes don't grant any type of, you know, lien or right on the property. What they do is they just allow us, give us the authority to redirect those real estate taxes, so they don't go into the general fund, but they go to pay these obligations. And I think what we found in all four of the residential TIFs which were underperforming is that they didn't build out, and obviously their projections were rosier than reality. You know, there were certain protections built into development agreements, but those protections were basically kind of front-loaded. They were backed by, like, for example, a letter of credit. And that letter of credit was either reduced over time or eliminated when the developer met certain benchmarks. And in looking at those, for example, the Peregrine Falcon, Phase 1 was included in the TIF, and it's supposed to be like 30 residences. But once they built 5, their letter of credit was released. Mission Cliffs had the same type of kind of sliding scale that once they built to certain numbers, the letter of credit was gradually reduced. So once they met those things, then the letter of credit was eliminated. So those type of protections were in the agreement, but they weren't effective enough if the project didn't build out. You have certain just standard breach of contract remedies, which we can look at and evaluate. One thing is, these, with the exception of Peregrine, these were not-for-profit partner developers that we partnered with to do these. So you have certain inherent problems there and going after them. They do have, in some cases, there may be some property that is owned, but again, the situation of Peregrine, they didn't get the property unless it was a 5-house rolling deal. Once they built 5, you give them more property, you give them more property. So the UG retains ownership of those properties. So the recourse for those particular ones, those 4 non-performing TIFs, at this stage are governed by the development agreement, and they are limited.
Any comments, questions, discussion?
I have a couple questions. I think this is really good information. I appreciate you putting it together. The issue of the letter of credit, the detail of the development agreement requirements, if you, in hindsight, would change any of that, are those guidelines embedded in here in your mind that would give someone who maybe follows in your footsteps enough guidance to incorporate those additional safeguards, or is it just the lessons learned and experience that you gain through hard knocks?
Well, I think those would really be incorporated, and I guess it's really not specifically mentioned here, but it would be incorporated more in the performance measures. I think, again, at the beginning, those 4 agreements, I think it was kind of assumed that once they got the ball rolling and everything was in, the market would take care of it and things would be fine. And as we saw in 2007, 2008, things weren't fine.
Yeah.
And they haven't really been jump-started to this point yet to get them going again. So the underperformance is the problem. I think that is addressed in, again, requiring more realistic feasibility studies.
So that's another question I had is, do we require feasibility studies by independent accounting firms, or do we rely on the developer to just throw us some feasibility studies?
I think they're initially prepared by the developer and I know staff scrutinize them, but.
In larger projects, we have gone out and had independent ones done. So, that really depends on the project that we're working with. And so in some of the smaller ones that we've looked at, we've had the developer come in with their study, and then we've done our cross-check back between Lou and his staff to look at what are their analysis, which they've done. I think, and nobody here worked on these 4 that he's referencing back, to that time, but I think a lot of those were done based on feasibility studies that, they plugged in revenue formulas that were based on a build-out in a shorter time period that I'd probably look at and be comfortable with. And whether we did that or the developer did that, I can't tell you. But I don't believe there was an independent analysis.
Well, I wonder if that might be something that we could put in our policy, that all feasibility studies have to be performed or verified by an independent auditor or accounting firm. Because it sounds like it's the feasibility study more than anything that's overly optimistic or modified to make the project perform.
I will say, when we do ours, and I guess I would only ask that you consider that at some of these tighter projects that we're getting into it, that it's pretty much out of pocket, and I can probably look at, the ones we did down in Argentine and around that TIF area. Had we required additional, that would just be project add, trying to figure it out. Now, typically, the difference comes to it is our staff comes in with pretty conservative numbers. We're looking at retail numbers. We look through it and evaluate it and come back and say, this is what the industry is showing in our community. They try to come in and show us national numbers, and we break that down to local. I'm not opposed to that kind of thing. I guess I probably look at it from a standpoint of, if we come to you and we don't do one, that maybe it's more of a justification of, what we did as far as the feasibility study and why we didn't hire a contract for an outside feasibility study. And I'll say that too, if they're not under our control, then I don't have the same. If they just walk in with it and say, well, we hired company XYZ to come do it, that's kind of like hiring your own appraisal. I mean, yeah. It has to be one that's under our contracting for us to put that kind of confidence in. So anytime we've made really big projects where that financial risk comes into play, and obviously Village West is a good example of that. When those came in, we always required that kind of thing. I think Plaza at the Speedway, we required the same when we go out for those kind of bond issues and such like that.
I guess at the end of the day, the question is, are there some TIF projects that we wish we hadn't done? And if that's the case, do these guidelines give us a roadmap to have avoided those? And I think the answer is there are probably some TIF projects we wish we had not done. Is that right?
I guess you could look back to these residential TIFs that we're talking about. And you probably have to break it down to that point of saying, here's the difference, Commissioner. I think if we come before you and say, here's a project, this is how close we think the coverage ratio is on it. And when we move from a point of saying, it's a pay-as-you-go TIF, and the developer's taking that, or we're going to issue a special revenue bond totally backed by that developer. Okay, that's over here in a different category. But when we get to the point of saying, okay, now we're ready to do a TIF that the unified government's going to stand behind, and we're going to go out and front some money and put it into the project. And that's a different category of project. Once we move into that area, and then we're going to give you and I can't attest to what might have gone on in a similar meeting like this, to when these projects came forward and said, okay, we're going to move forward with this housing project. We're going to issue bonds on it. Here's the probability that it may or may not get paid off. Because if we stand before you and make that statement, say, okay, we're going to go out and issue $2 million in bonds. We've done our analysis, and it's a 1-to-1 coverage ratio on a moderate case scenario. Meaning, you can do a high case scenario, it might be $1.2 for every dollar we project, or it could get 80 cents on the dollar. And as a governing body, you said, boy, that's a good, this is a good project for our community.
Right.
Let's move forward and get it done. 10 years from now, and we look back at that and go, well, that's a failing TIF. Well, I wonder why that commission approved that. And if you might look at it's easy for us to remember 18th and I-70. That was a very blighted area.
Sure.
The day we decided to move forward and do the demolition on that and expend the money to which there was no revenue coming back in, we improved our community. And had the TIF dollars not performed and they've moved to a performance now, I won't speak for Commissioner McCurry in his district, but I would say he probably says that's a much better area in the community than it was back then, even if we were failing. So from a dollars and cents perspective, I can look back at these TIFs and say, no, they're not working right. But I would probably, if you broke them down into the communities and the areas they're at, you probably got to go back to the individual or the commissioners and say, are we better off, even though we're having to fund it by, $50,000 or $100,000 a year to make that work? So it's hard to, it's hard for me to second guess because I wasn't wearing the boots of the person that was standing there making that analysis, and nor was any members of our team. But you kind of put yourself at that point when we walk before you at that project that I don't know if you want to have a policy that's just hard and fast and says, we won't do it. I mean, you can. I mean, you can set that up and say, in this case, we're not going to do it unless we see an independent feasibility analysis and it shows that in a moderate case scenario, it will pay for itself.
Yeah. Well, I think the best answer is we shouldn't have a hard and fast policy that says all these hurdles must be cleared in order to make the project work. But if you know you're going to be subsidizing something for the next 20 years, it would be nice to know that when you make the decision
Yes.
to go forward.
I agree with that 100%.
As opposed to being surprised in year 5 or year 8 or whatever.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to add, I think one of the useful benefits of just establishing the policy is if we were to modify the policy with these supplements, when next time we bring a TIF proposal or an agreement before you, you have a policy in place and you can say, did staff consider this? Did we move forward with this? Do we have performance measures built into that policy? And so I think it's something going forward. The same, we began this meeting tonight with a YMCA issue and a contract. And the reason we brought that before you is we've modified our policy in that any new or change to our capital budget of greater than $50,000, we're bringing it before this body. And I think that's certainly one of the benefits of having these policies in place.
There is one thing that Commissioner McGee actually brought this up on the day we had our retreat. And I know that on that day, we talked about, is it possible to redirect if a TIF is overperforming? If we have one that's overperforming and one that's under, can you redirect the extra dollars from TIF A into TIF B? And I guess the answer that we found out was no, that the typical agreement is that if it overperforms, then it just pays itself off earlier. But it just seems that if we could ever get to the point where we could write an agreement such that if a TIF does overperform, that the extra funds could be used, if necessary, to prop up any TIF that is at least temporarily not performing, rather than going to the general fund. And I know there's probably pros and cons to that.
I'm not sure legally we can do that. Where we can
Rats.
do it is if we have multiple project areas within a single
Okay.
TIF. We have the ability to do that. And for example, we did that, or we had the ability to do that with Mission Cliffs. We had a project
I
area
see.
A, B, 39th and Rainbow. We have a similar multiple project areas.
Now, we have used it in the sense of by not giving the TIF all of the revenue that's being generated in the site. And I think Plaza Speedway is probably a good one to use as a comparison. Dollars come in off that TIF, so, and I don't know what the breakout is, but if a dollar comes in, a portion of that goes to pay off the bonds that are outstanding. Now, we're not behind those bonds. They are sold strictly on the revenues that are coming from the project, but then a portion of it then comes to the Unified Government General Fund. Now, it doesn't go to other TIFs, it comes to the general fund, but if it's, $500,000 for the course of the year, then you can take it and say, in theory, okay, we're supplementing any TIFs that are underperforming at the same time. And in a sense, that kind of thing's happening, because really probably some of the stronger TIFs are the bigger commercial ones, and they probably, on that chart we showed you last time, they probably do offset the lower ones.
So the request before us tonight is to approve the modifications to the TIF policy and procedure here and forward to full commission.
I so move.
Second.
So there's a motion and a second to approve the revisions to the TIF policy. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Excuse me, we will have a resolution when it comes before the full commission. Resolution.
I'm sorry.
Policy as presented.
Thank you. Roll call.
Roll call. Alvey?
Aye.
Walters?
Aye.
Townsend?
Aye.
McTiernan?
Aye. And now, before I say anything more, I'm going to look at Mr. Bach and I'm going to ask, did we finally get to the end of the agenda?
You've covered it all.
We did it, okay. In that case, we are adjourned.